Okay, so let's fill in some information here, and then we can actually put it to some use in a couple minutes. Okay, so our sine and cosine, our general functions, are there given to us. Again, our parent function is when a and b are both 1. So we talked about that in the previous paper, or on the previous sheet of paper, but we're going to talk about generics now. So what happens when we have an a and b value that aren't necessarily just 1? How can we find our intercepts, maximums, minimums of our sine and cosine function to make the graphing easier? So if we look at our characteristics for our sine value, going back to our sine value in the other page, intercepts means where does our graph cross our x-axis. So our intercepts for our sine happen in 3 spots. Our graph crosses at 0 degrees, our graph crosses at 180 degrees, and our graph crosses at 360 degrees. Okay, so 0, 180, and 360 happens to be where our graph crosses the x-axis. And where it crosses is where our y value is 0. Okay, so our intercepts for our sine value happens at 0 degrees, 180 degrees, and 360 degrees. Okay, and then what we do is whatever our b value is, we're going to divide everything by b. And that's basically just going to scale what our graph looks like, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But since our intercepts happen at 0 degrees, 180 degrees, and 360 degrees, to find our intercepts of any of these general sine and cosine functions, we divide our degree value, where those intercepts would naturally already happen, by our b value. The reason this isn't 0 degrees divided by b is because whatever b is, 0 divided by any number is going to be 0 anyway. So we can leave that as just 0 degrees, since our sine value will always go through our origin 0, 0. And again, intercepts means that our y values are always 0. Cosine, same idea for cosine. Cosine means we actually cross our graph at 2 spots. Those 2 spots happen to be 90 degrees and 270 degrees. Same idea here. Since our graph intercepts cross at 90 degrees, we divide that by b. So that intercept would be 0 because it crosses our axes. And then our other intercept happens at 270 degrees. We divide that by b if we're going to be scaling by some other number. Y-intercepts, our y value is still 0 for intercepts. Going back to our sine function over here, our maximum happens at 90 degrees, right? And then our minimum happens at 270 degrees. Now these are also going to get scaled by whatever our b value is if it's not 1. So since our maximum happens at 90 degrees, we can find our maximum of any sine and cosine by dividing that by whatever our b value is. And then this is going to occur at our a value. We'll talk a little bit about what that means, but our a value is going to be our values along our y-axis. It's going to be what we call our amplitude, but we'll talk about that shortly as well. Our minimum for sine, if you look at your graph again, our minimum for our sine happens at 207 degrees. If we divide that by b, and then since it's our minimum, it's going to be negative a as our ordered pair. It'll become a lot easier in a couple minutes when we start using this as an example. Same thing for cosine. If you look at your cosine graph, back over here, our cosine has 2 maximums at 0 degrees and 360 degrees. So again, 0 degrees and 0 is our max. 360 degrees divided by b. This should not be 0. This should actually be a, because it's our maximum. Our maximum happens at, instead of 1, it'll be a. Instead of negative 1, it'll be negative a. But the idea is that our maximum happens at 0 degrees and A. And then our second maximum happens at 360 degrees and whatever our A value is going to be for that. A is our amplitude, and our parent function again, our A is going to be 1 and -1 because that tends to be the numbers in front of our parent functions, right? Because your A value in front of cosine and sine are both 1. So you know that the distance between 0 is going to be 1 and -1. It's not always going to be that case. You may have some other numbers for A. So that's where we get this value from. Again, our minimum for our cosine, if we look at that, our minimum happens at 180 degrees. So our minimum is 180 degrees divided by whatever our B value is, and that would be our negative A value to come up with that value.